A medieval city woke up before sunrise. The streets were already filled with the sounds of merchants shouting, wagon wheels creaking, and dogs barking. The air felt heavy. Waste was thrown from windows, livestock wandered through the roads, and piles of garbage sat beside homes. In a world like this, people were constantly thirsty. But instead of water, they were often handed beer. Sometimes early in the morning, sometimes several times a day, and sometimes even as children. Today, that sounds insane, but for people in the past, alcohol wasn't entertainment, it was part of everyday life. Weak beer replaced water, wine accompanied nearly every meal, and monasteries became massive brewing centers. So how did this happen? And why did alcohol become one of the most common drinks in human history? Today, we're exploring why beer and wine became such an important part of life in the past, and how filthy cities, dangerous diseases, and hard labor changed the habits of millions of people. Modern people rarely think about water. It comes from a faucet, sits in stores, and feels completely ordinary. But for most of human history, clean water was never guaranteed, especially in large cities. Medieval streets were crowded and narrow. Horses, pigs, and humans lived almost side by side. Sewage systems barely existed, and waste often ended up in rivers and wells. When it rained, the filth flowed directly into water sources. And even though people knew nothing about bacteria, they noticed one thing. Certain water made people sick, especially during hot summers. Outbreaks of dysentery, intestinal infections, and disease were common. Sometimes entire neighborhoods became infected. Water still remained part of daily life. People used wells, rivers, and natural springs, especially in smaller settlements where the water was cleaner. But in crowded cities, weak beer and wine slowly became a more reliable and convenient option. The popularity of beer wasn't only about safety. Beer was also food, and incredibly useful food at that. Medieval people burned enormous amounts of energy every single day. Farmers worked from sunrise to sunset. Blacksmiths, builders, and laborers spent their lives doing exhausting physical work. The body needed calories, and beer provided them, especially medieval beer. It was thick, cloudy, and often filled with bits of grain. Sometimes it looked more like liquid porridge than modern beer. That's why beer was often called liquid bread. It quenched thirst and provided energy, lasted longer than fresh food, and was relatively cheap. For poor families, a mug of beer could become part of an entire meal. When modern people hear that medieval society drank alcohol every day, they imagine a world full of drunk people. But reality looked very different. Most drinks were extremely weak. So-called small beer sometimes contained only 1 to 2% alcohol. People could drink it throughout the day and still work normally. In many ways, it was simply an everyday beverage. It was consumed by peasants, soldiers, workers, monks, travelers, and sometimes even children, because weak beer was considered safer than water from questionable wells. That didn't mean medieval Europe was constantly drunk. For most people, alcohol was simply part of ordinary life. Brewing involved an important process. The water was heated and boiled. That killed many dangerous microorganisms. After that came fermentation. As a result, the final drink often became safer than untreated water, especially in crowded cities. Everything depended on the place, the time period, and the quality of local water sources. In some regions, people relied on clean springs without major problems. In others, city water became genuinely dangerous. That's why weak beer slowly became one of the most common drinks across Europe. In Southern Europe, wine was more common than beer, especially in Greece, Rome, and the Mediterranean world. But ancient Greeks and Romans rarely drank pure wine. Most of the time, they mixed it with water. Sometimes the mixture became so weak that it resembled a modern light cocktail. Drinking undiluted wine was often considered barbaric. Wine accompanied dinners, celebrations, religious ceremonies, diplomatic meetings. It became part of culture itself. At the same time, the Romans had access to relatively advanced water systems thanks to aqueducts. That made life in ancient Rome very different from later medieval cities. Medieval monasteries became major brewing centers. Monks spent years improving recipes. They cultivated hops, experimented with fermentation, and built large breweries. In many monasteries, beer became part of the normal daily diet. During fasting periods, it helped provide extra calories. Some monastery beers were so nutritious that they practically replaced food. Many famous European brewing traditions survived thanks to monasteries. The real turning point came during the 19th century. Scientists finally proved that diseases spread through microorganisms. After that, a revolution began. Cities developed. water filtration, sewage systems, treatment plants, modern plumbing. Urban life slowly became cleaner. Deaths from infection dropped dramatically. For the first time in human history, ordinary water became safer than most alcoholic drinks. Something that feels completely normal today once would have seemed revolutionary. People in the past drank beer and wine not because they couldn't live without alcohol. For many, it was food, a source of calories, part of culture, and sometimes a safer option than local water. In filthy cities and difficult living conditions, weak beer became an incredibly practical solution. Ironically, one of the most ordinary things today, a glass of clean water, would have looked like a miracle to someone living in the Middle Ages. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.